say you and Jess had a much rougher week than we did. I'm sure.
Yeah, we were just lamenting on how exhausted we are from like talking for, 4 days straight, basically.
Yeah, it's a lot of socializing,
Yeah.
but sounds like it was very productive.
Yeah, it was great. It really was. Both meetings were wonderful.
Good.
All right, we got a number of folks joining. We'll give it a couple minutes just to let people get back from their lunch breaks.
I'm not gonna let this Otter AI in.
Yeah, Mark was telling me about what that is the other day. It's a AI thing that can transcribe your entire minute meeting discussion.
Yeah, we use fireflies for that.
Possibly someone who registered for the meeting has a setting that the otter would automatically join.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would not let it.
It is very useful though.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll wait till 1:02 and then we'll get started. How's that sound, Carrie?
Good.
See, there's still a few folks trailing in. All right. Well, we're 2 minutes after 1, so we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our the web launch of our 2025 Great Lakes Fishery Commission Call for Proposals. My name is Andrew Muir. I'm Science Director at the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. Before we get started, I'm just going to quickly turn it over to Jake Kimmel, who's the Sea Lamprey Research Program Associate, to provide you a few housekeeping items. Jake, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Well, it looks like most of you have your first and last names in the Zoom, but if you could change your Zoom name in your window using the three dots in the upper right corner to put in your first and last name and then affiliation if it fits in there, just to put a face to the name and where you're coming from. Another reminder, just to remain muted during the presentation. We'll have a Q&A at the end, and for that, we'll ask you to use the raise hand feature and/or drop your questions in the chat, which we'll refer to. And if you have any questions that pop up during the webinar, you can post those in chat and we'll refer back to those later. If you have any technical issues at all during the webinar today, contact Carrie Baker in the chat and she'll try to help get that situated for you. And then finally, we're recording the presentation that'll be shared publicly on our webpage. So by staying on, you're consenting to being recorded. Just want to share that with you all. And thanks for tuning in, and I'll turn it back over to Andrew and we can get started.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jake. And again, thanks for joining us. Last year was the first year we implemented a web-based element to our call for proposals, and it was viewed favorably. We got some good feedback, and we're going to take a slightly different track on that this year. But today we're going to kind of go through a brief presentation, and then we'll facilitate a bit of a discussion to try and address any of your questions. And what I'd like to do to start, and hopefully my friend Carrie can help me out here, but we just want to take a minute to introduce the Great Lakes Fishery Commission Secretariat staff and then any research board members who are joining us, because they can also serve to provide some clarification or as contacts and help with the question and answer. So we'll start with staff. You met Jake, but Jake, maybe say a quick hello and a little bit about what you do here.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm the research associate for the Sea Lamprey Research Program. So I'll help facilitate the proposal process on the Sea Lamprey side. So anyone coming from the Sea Lamprey world, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to reach out to me. And my contact should be at the end of the presentation today.
And Carrie?
Hi everyone, Carrie Baker. I'm the Assistant Programs Manager with the Great Lakes Fishery Commission here in the Science Directorate. I work really closely with the Sea Lamprey Research Program and serve as a connection point for the Sea Lamprey Control Program.
Thank you. And we next we'll introduce Julie.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julie Hinderer. I'm the Science Programs Manager. I do a lot of the sort of higher level administration of all the research programs, and then I also coordinate the Science Transfer Program, which I believe you'll learn a little bit more about in the presentation.
Excellent. And we have a few board members joining us. We'll start with Nick Johnson.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Nick. I work up in northern Michigan at the United States Geological Survey's Hammond Bay Biological Station. I'm very happy and eager to answer any questions you have about our facility, and we support all kinds of different sea lamprey control projects. So thanks for joining.
Excellent. I say Steve Cook next.
Hey folks, Steve Cook. I'm a professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, and I'm chair of the Board of Technical Experts, which is the group that evaluates the proposals related to the fisheries side of things. And up until a few years ago, I was chair of the Sea Lamprey Research Board, so I can provide context and answer any questions related to both of those files. Good to see all of you. Thanks.
Great. And Margaret, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm Margaret Docker at the University of Manitoba. I'm on the Sea Lamprey Research Board. Happy to answer any questions related to the proposals to the Sea Lamprey Research Program, and particularly about the genetic control theme.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, board members, for joining us. We appreciate that. All right, so we'll get going on the webinar. Our objectives for today really are quite simple. First, to increase accessibility to commission funding. That's the number one reason we're here today. Secondly, to reduce uncertainty in proposal preparation, submission, and the evaluation process. And then finally, to enhance training opportunities, bringing new folks into the programs, as well as students, and exposing them to Great Lakes research and opportunities. So the Commission's research programs are highly competitive. This slide shows mean funding rates over the past 5 years on the left-hand side. We typically receive a high number of pre-proposals. Those are shown by the numbers in the bubbles here. So on the left, that column is the fishery research program. On the right here, with the little sea lamprey mouth, that's the sea lamprey research program. And they get winnowed down through our process to some number of full proposals that are requested, and ultimately some numbers of full proposals that are funded. Overall, about 24% of the fishery pre-proposals are ultimately funded, and about 34% of the sea lamprey pre-proposals are funded. And this is these data are from the past 5 years. So hopefully that demonstrates that the programs are highly competitive, which sometimes gets misinterpreted. And I just want to kind of make sure folks are aware of some of the things we're doing to increase participation in the programs and accessibility, and to kind of dispel the myth that it's not a club. You can, in fact, acquire funding by working with the boards and with the staff to evolve your research. And a high priority for the Commission has always been to bring new investigators into the programs, and we've been successful at doing that. So over the past 5 years, We've had an average of 1 to 2 new investigators funded in each of the programs each year. So roughly 20% of those proposals that come in that are successful are led by new investigators. This web launch and the webinar we did last year are intended to help bring new investigators into our programs. And during the history of the program, we've had over 120 different institutions contracted or funded. So our funding casts a broad net, and it is available to everyone. So part of the reason we're doing this is really to make the programs, hopefully help make the programs more accessible to a broader range of folks, and to try to inspire more new investigators to enter the program. And just as evidence of that commitment, this slide shows some data that Jess Ives pulled together for us. It represents data over the last few years showing the success rate of first-time pre-proposals. So that's shown in blue. And for the fishery program, it's roughly 25%. These are first-time pre-proposal submission success rates. And in sea lamprey, it's about 30% roughly. But if investigators consider the feedback from the boards, revise their proposals, and resubmit, that success rate jumps to roughly 50% on the fishery side of things and about 40 on the sea lamprey side of things. So the point is that unsuccessful PIs should really take advantages of the resources that are available, the contacts that they make through interacting with the boards and the staff, and work to revise and resubmit research ideas. Okay, so I'm now going to turn it back over to Jake, who's going to take a few minutes and walk you through our funding cycle and talk a bit about our FY 2025 call for proposals, and then we'll get back into a little bit about some elements of creating a successful proposal. Jake, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Andrew. So our funding is allocated on roughly a 1-year cycle beginning in November. That's where we are now with the release of the 2025 call for proposals. And this is soliciting projects that would begin in January of 2026. So the pre-proposals will be due January 15th of 2025. And then after those proposals are received, the research boards convene in March to review those pre-proposals. And then successful pre-proposals are invited to submit full proposals, which are due June 1st. And then those full proposals are actually subject to external peer review, which is coordinated by board members with relevant expertise for the different projects. And then after we get those reviews back, all the board members will review the full proposals and peer reviews to discuss and evaluate the full proposals at the fall meeting in September. And then from there, recommendations come to the commission on projects to fund, and the commission reviews those at the December interim meeting. And then upon commission approval of a project, projects will begin that the first of the next year. So in this case, for the cycle we're looking at now, that would be January 1st, 2026. So to review our call for proposals this year, I first want to direct you to the QR code on the right-hand side of the screen. And then also we'll have links posted in the chat for all the different web pages we talk about today. Carol will be posting those in there for me. So any of the information we talk about today should be found on our call for proposals page. So you can always refer back to that or reach out to a staff member if you have any questions at a later date. And now I'm going to see all these pop-ups coming in. So our pre-proposals are due January 15th, like I mentioned, and those will be submitted through a portal system on our webpage. So you'll see a link for that in the chat as well. And for additional guidance in navigating the portal or our website, you can look at last year's webinars where we discussed that in more detail. The QR codes for those are on the left-hand side of the screen for fishery research program or sea lamprey research program. And links in the chat will be available as well. And on our webpage, you'll find templates for the pre-proposals that you should follow. And these will contain specific instructions to complete your pre-proposal and discuss some of the evaluation criteria. So today's webinar is to provide more detailed information to assist you in guiding you through the development of a competitive pre-proposal. So Dr. Mee will review that later today on how pre-proposals are evaluated in more detail, highlight some, and then we'll also highlight some special topics that we're seeking pre-proposals for during this cycle. So I'll move into those now. So as usual, we invite proposals that fall under the Sea Lamprey and Fishery Research Program themes and research priorities. And more information can be found on that call for proposals webpage I had mentioned earlier. But we also invite proposals that fall under topics outside of those themes, specifically things that fall under these special topics that I'll go through now. These are topics that the commission's focused on and are high priority for the commissioners. And again, more information for the research program themes and these special topics can be found in the call for proposals on our webpage. So to start, the first theme, special topic in our fisheries research program is human dimensions theme. So funds are available for projects focused on advancing human dimensions research, and topics of interest include demographics, fishery evaluation, and relationships of fishers to food systems. Some other topics include barriers and challenges amongst fishers, food sovereignty, and environmental justice in fisheries management. For the next, more detail, like I mentioned, can be found on the call for proposals. There's actually links to the human dimensions research theme, as well as a theme paper for your reference. So next, the commission also seeks Indigenous-led research proposals on stewardship of fish populations guided by Indigenous knowledge. So our partners at Trent University coordinate the Indigenous Great Lakes Network, and they've been working with the network to identify research priorities. So during 2023 and 2024, the network identified a number of areas of research need, and the commission would like to draw some attention to these by seeking Indigenous-led proposals to work on these areas listed here, which are areas of interest to network member nations. And I also want to point out that this is actually the first time the commission's been focusing attention on its call for proposals directly towards Indigenous research priorities. First time seeking Indigenous-led research to address these specific needs here. And we will continue to work with our partners at Trent University and the network to develop research priorities for future funding cycles. And finally, the last special topic within the fishery research program, we have funds available for projects focused on improving understanding of ecological, evolutionary, or environmental drivers that underlie Corrigonan population dynamics, ideally to inform science planning steps in the Corrigonan restoration framework. For lake whitefish, projects seeking to determine potential recruitment limitations such as dry-scented mussels, thiamine deficiency, predators, and degree of exploitation are desired. For the ciscos, projects seeking to determine the extent and/or fitness consequences of hybridization and introgression, as well as risks associated with alternative gamete sources are desired. And you should be seeing links in the chat for each of these or special topic areas as well. All right, now moving into the sea lamprey research program, we have a couple special topics here. So the Sea Lamprey Control Board is concerned about the potential effects of climate change on lampricide treatments and barrier efficacy. Areas of emphasis include treatment effectiveness under varying temperatures, alkalinity, pH, and flow, timing of treatments, and understanding changes in physical river conditions and barrier stability that might be associated with more frequent extreme weather events. And the Sea Lamprey Control Program is also interested in understanding population level effects of lampricides on non-target species. So some of these organisms might include, but are not limited to, mud puppies, native lampreys, native mussels, and any state, provincial, or federally listed aquatic species. And additional research in this area could help further our understanding of how non-target species respond to and recover from lampricide exposure, which could inform treatment protocols to minimize these negative effects. So that was a kind of brief overview of the special topics. And if you have any questions about any of these, please write them down or post them in the chat, and we can touch back on those during the Q&A portion later. And I just want to remind you that we also have our webinars that were recorded from last year that you can refer to for more information, or access any of the links provided in the chat to our web pages for more resources. Now I'll turn it back over to Andrew, who will walk you through some key considerations for proposal development.
Great, thanks, Jake. And yeah, as Jake mentioned, last year we really focused on sort of walking folks through the technical steps associated with our website and how to get a pre-proposal in. This year we're going to focus a little bit on a little bit more different areas and talk about some of the key considerations that the board may focus on during the pre-proposal and full proposal review and evaluation process. Our rationale for doing that is that we, again, going back to the objective I highlighted in one of the first slides, is that we really want to fund your research. That's our primary objective, to fund high quality research and bring new investigators into the program. And so the only way you can really access the funding is by submitting a pre-proposal. Pre-proposals are 1 page in length with a couple of pages of supporting information, so a total of 3 pages. So relatively minor investment, although some argue that submitting a 1-pager is harder than submitting a full proposal because you got to be extremely concise with your words. But the idea is that you sort of float your idea past the boards. The boards invest deeply in providing thoughtful feedback to those who submit pre-proposals, and they're committed to helping investigators refine their ideas and ultimately obtain funding. So in the next few slides, I'm just going to go through some of the elements that will hopefully be of some assistance in you developing proposals for the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. So the Commission's science programs are mission driven. That's different from some other funding agencies. And what it means is that the research ideas really need to meet the needs of the Commission and its partners. Pre-proposals are largely evaluated on the basis of 4 elements: relevance, novelty, feasibility, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and cultural competence. Because the research programs are driven by the Commission's mission, research must be deemed by the boards as relevant to that mission. So the first and arguably one of the most important considerations at the pre-proposal stage is clearly demonstrating that your proposed project is squarely aligned with the research needs and priorities and themes of the Commission. And all that information, as we've been saying, is available on the website. If your proposed research is not relevant, it is unlikely to make it past the pre-proposal stage. Second, investigators need to demonstrate that the results of their research will provide new information that is of value to the Commission and its partners. It doesn't need to be completely novel, but certainly needs to build off previous work and be of value to the partners. Third, feasibility is largely addressed at the full proposal stage, but reviewers and the boards do consider it in the broad sense at the pre-proposal stage. So for instance, can the objectives be achieved given the proposed methods or timeline and budget? And then finally, the board considers whether elements of diversity, equity, inclusion, and cultural competence have been considered in the development of the research idea. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these elements over the next few slides, and we'll explore what each of them means with respect to developing a research idea and team, and how those key considerations play out in terms of generating a quality pre-proposal. So first, I'll reiterate that the ideas need to be aligned with the Commission's mission and the priorities of the partners we serve. Additionally, it may be challenging for new PIs, particularly, to know how their research fits into past and ongoing research. And we do have some resources that I'm going to highlight in a minute here with respect to that. Finally, most research projects begin with a question. Investing the time to make sure that you're asking the right question that has relevance to your partners and to the Commission is an important step in generating a research idea. So these are some resources that are available to help you understand how something you're considering developing as a project idea may fit in or complement what's going on in the basin. So we have a project catalog that's maintained. Maybe Jess can put in the chat how far back that project catalog goes. It's relatively new, and so we're still populating it, but you can get a sense for the current, at least, and ongoing research projects that are being undertaken in the basin. We also have on our website, under the publications and reports section, a list of all of the projects that historically have been funded and completed by the Commission. Some of those do not ultimately turn into publications, peer-reviewed publications that are easily accessible. So that's a good resource to understand the history of what's being funded. May also inspire new research ideas to see what kinds of things have been funded. And then finally, the Great Lakes Commission, not the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, but the Great Lakes Commission is developing this Great Lakes Investment Tracker. And so it's a website so you can see where and what projects dollars have been invested in across the basin. This is also a relatively new resource, so I'm not sure how complete it is, but at least it's a resource that will help you understand the scope of things that are ongoing in the basin. All right, team. Team is critically important. We want to ask questions like, who is the audience? Who are you working with to develop a project? Is it managers? Is it educators? And if so, co-production might be an option for you to consider. So working with those groups to co-develop your research idea. Many projects fail because they fail to get off the ground because the PI tends to start at the end instead of the beginning. And good research ideas start with conservations and relationship building that ultimately leads to team buildings. Start with the sort of who, where, and what to help inform what expertise or with whom you should be engaging in discussions and potentially included on the team. Ask what samples are required. So do I need to work with any of the agencies or institutions to acquire existing or new samples? The fishery managers have expressed to us that they really need to know early on in the project development process what samples might be required because they plan their crews, their vessel crews activities several months, if not a year in advance of some of the work that needs to be done. So you really need to engage in the discussions with partners in terms of what samples might be required well ahead of time. What data are required to address your objectives? And I want to make a note here that most of us are trained in Western science. Data means one thing to us, but broadly, and in the world we operate in now, data does not just refer to numbers. So for First Nations in Canada, for example, the principles of ownership, control, access, and possession, or OCAP, apply. And the definition of data includes information about cultures, languages, oral histories, and traditions, for example, as information about the lands and resources that First Nations have stewarded, protected, and may have inherent right and do have inherent rights to. So we need to think really carefully about our definition of data and ask whether those providing information or supporting projects or access to lands should be brought in on research as research partners in a project. This is not an easy thing to think about. It's not an easy thing to consider. And I personally have made some mistakes in this space over the years. So a lot of this is new, but we need to be very considerate and thoughtful about who we bring in as part of our team. And then finally, and critically important, investigators need to consider what expertise is required to fully address the objectives. So what types of disciplinary expertise do you require to implement the methods necessary to achieve your objectives? So those are really key considerations. Although not a requirement in our proposal template, developing even a very simple conceptual model of the system can be tremendously informative and can form a strong basis for a research project. So a few considerations in developing a conceptual model include asking the team, how do we think about the system? How do we think that the system operates? What's the appropriate scale at which we look at the questions? What are the key pathways? Energetic, bioenergetic pathways, ecological pathways, trophic pathways. What are the key mechanisms that are at play? And then what variables, both biotic and abiotic, could affect that mechanism? So these are all important things to kind of ground the basis of a research proposal. And just to give you an example, this is a fairly simple conceptual model that we developed to drive research around food web structure and ecosystem function in the Great Lakes. Some work that Jess Ives and a bunch of folks, some of whom may be on this call, participated in 2018, 2019. But the idea is developing a model like this helps you really kind of ground the research and develop a very strong experimental or sampling design to support the objectives. Well, the commission funds a portfolio of science, including hypothesis testing, fundamental descriptive research, and more recently, two-eyed seeing research. For example, PIs or investigators need to be really clear about what their research is. So don't disguise it. Be upfront and be clear. This next slide gives an example of being clear and not disguising descriptive work as hypothesis testing. And this is from one of the commission's original PERM scientists, or Partnerships in Ecosystem Research and Management scientist, Dr. Michael Jones. He used to put this disclaimer, I'll call it, in his proposals where appropriate, that said, this proposal is not focused on testing hypotheses, but rather on synthesizing existing information into a framework for forecasting the consequences of management actions. Consequently, our objectives may not conform to the GLFC definition of a research objective. So, you know, he's being extremely clear here, and that what he's proposing may diverge somewhat from how the commission typically, or the boards typically, look at research proposals and review research proposals. And that's okay, because not everything fits into a perfect box. It's okay to diverge from that. You just have to explain it, provide a rationale, and be very clear in terms of what your intents are. This slide, again, is specific to those proposals that are based on a typical hypothesis testing framework. And I know there are various ways of defining hypotheses and predictions. I tend to think of hypotheses as possible explanations of cause and effect. Research questions can be translated into hypotheses that generate then multiple testable predictions. But because there are many ways of doing this, how investigators frame hypotheses and predictions is really not quite as important as being clear and explaining what it is you're doing, why. So being consistent and justifying the approach you're taking. The commission stresses the importance of generating good research objectives, partly because objectives are the primary means by which we can evaluate the success of a project once it's been implemented. Additionally, strong objectives drive the content of the entire proposal. So objectives flow from hypotheses and predictions in the case of that type of research, or observation potentially in the type of descriptive type research, and they're formulated in the proposal rationale. Methods should be crafted to demonstrate how each objective will be achieved. So everything sort of flows from that. And the commission would like to see objectives related to scientific understanding as opposed to methodological steps. And I'll explain what I mean by that in the next slide. The objective should identify a pattern, a process, or a relationship to be tested. And poor objectives is probably one of the number one reasons that a pre-proposal may get screened out or ultimately rejected on first submission. So to demonstrate what I mean with respect to objectives being methodological versus ecological in construct, consider the following. And these are objectives that are taken directly from proposals that were historically funded versus those that were not. The first set of objectives are consistent with what our boards are looking for. So the first one is determine if dietary niche and niche breadth differ between migrants and Bay resident conspecifics, or Cisco. The second one is determine if burbot captured in rivers and open water Great Lakes regions are reproductively isolated, or whether regional mixing of river and open water burbot is occurring. Contrast those with these, and I apologize if any of you wrote these particular objectives. I don't think so. I was kind of careful in selecting them, but the first is compile and review previous research on swimming capabilities of sea lamprey and common native jumping species in the Great Lakes, and on materials used to prevent lampreys from latching. So I think you can see some of the issues with respect to what the commission is looking for in terms of objectives here. This is really a methodological approach to achieve something that could be linked to the ecology of these species and their movement ecology. The second one is not a sentence. And so, you know, that's part of the issue here, but it says basic physical exams of lake sturgeon supported by documentary evidence such as survey forms and photographs. Okay, so I think you can sort of see the contrast in those two sets of objectives, and hopefully that helps you understand the point between what the boards are looking for in terms of ecologically based objectives that identify patterns or processes versus methodological steps. All right, so for the remainder of the webinar, I'm going to switch gears here and talk briefly about some of the considerations at the full proposal stage. Investigators who make it through the pre-proposal stage are asked to submit a full proposal. In addition to providing some information about considerations for developing a full proposal, really the main intent for us including this section is to contrast what the board is looking at the full proposal versus the pre-proposal stage. I sort of highlighted the key areas of emphasis that the board is looking at with respect to evaluation at the pre-proposal stage, rationale or relevance being a critical one. At the full proposal stage, the board really digs more into some logistical considerations, but particularly scientific merit and the methods, especially, as well as overall feasibility and sort of linking all of the elements of a proposal to those objectives. So the commission and its research boards have recently placed more of an emphasis on diversity, equity, inclusion, and cultural competence. These principles are just really beginning to be reflected in our research programs. We're making small steps to improve that. And we're asking PIs not just to submit a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement with the proposals, although that's what our instructions currently say, but really to demonstrate how these principles and actions that contribute to inclusive excellence in science are built into the proposal. So it's not good enough now to just say that we're considering these things or that these things are important, but really to weave those throughout the proposal and show how team was influenced by these considerations, show how place and sampling methods were influenced by some of these considerations. I also mentioned previously that if your research requires agency or institution facilities, vessel time, or samples, you need to have those discussions with them well in advance of proposing research at our January 15th deadline. So you need to talk to folks well ahead of time and make sure you have commitment to those resources. Nick Johnson, who is the director at the Hammond Bay Biological Station, mentioned that in his intro, that there are resources there, and he also helps procure sea lamprey to support sea lamprey research. Those conversations had to be had with him prior to January 14th if you're submitting a pre-proposal on the 15th. Finally, in some instances, law or ethics require consultation or landowner approval, for example. Investigators should demonstrate in the proposal or with an attached letter that those approvals have been acquired. And I've got a couple of examples here to give you a sense for different ways that you can achieve this, even within you can indicate some of these things within a pre-proposal, but this is really at the full proposal stage with supporting documentation or how you phrase things in the proposal itself. So the first example is a support letter, and it states that on behalf of the Sioux Tribe of Chippewa and Ottawa Indians, please accept our support for the project Movements and Population Dynamics of Burbot in Northern Lake Michigan. So this team reached out, worked with the tribe on the proposal, and obtained a letter of support and permission to do that work in the adjacent waters. The second one is a statement put in by an investigator, and it says, this research will focus on building strong partnerships governed by co-signed research protocol agreements with First Nations and tribes throughout the Great Lakes. So this team actually developed a standard protocol for engaging with Indigenous communities and went so far as putting that template and getting those templates signed with respect to working arrangements for this work. And then the third is a statement in a support letter from, it may even be from Nick, I think this was recent, but he stated in a support letter for proposal, I can confirm no anticipated difficulty in procuring and providing the 100 larval sea lamprey larger than 100 millimeters that are requested to support your research. So those are just a couple of examples. Again, hard to fit some of that in at the pre-proposal stage, but you could certainly indicate we've had these discussions, and then expand on it at the full proposal stage. And then in terms of scientific merit, at the full proposal stage, the boards, they're really asked to dig into the merit of the proposed work. Investigators are required to be explicit about study design, including times, places, sample size, data collection procedures, analytical methods, reporting, and the timeframes associated with all of those activities. Each of those elements should be justified. So, for instance, sample sizes could be backed by an analysis or citing previous research, but the idea is not just to put forward good methods, but to provide some support to reviewers and the board that those methods are indeed appropriate for what you're trying to do. For proposals with multiple investigators, you could indicate by adding, for example, the investigator initials in parentheses at the end of a section or a section of methods, demonstrating that that lab or that group will be responsible for that element of the methods or the work or the sampling. Those are just some practices that could help be very clear to the boards in terms of who's doing what and do they have the appropriate expertise to do so. The boards also dig into feasibility in a much more extensive way at the full proposal stage than they did at the pre-proposal stage. They're asked to analyze the methods, the experimental design, and the research team and budget in the context of the rationale, hypotheses, predictions, and objectives to really assess the feasibility of the proposed work. So there's a number of items highlighted here that you need to think about as you're developing a full proposal. Okay, and then finally, just want to highlight here a few additional resources that are available to folks who are thinking about putting in a pre-proposal or who in the future may be working on a full proposal. As I mentioned at the outset, our intent is to involve new people, get new people involved in the programs, fund your research. So you can reach out and discuss research ideas with myself, with the team, with the theme leads. Some of them are very willing to work with you on developing proposals or at least help point you in the right direction. The facility managers are highlighted on our website. So Nick's group, for example, that runs the Hammond Bay Biological Station, there's a blurb on there that explains what types of resources in terms of equipment, facilities, raceways, as well as animal procurement are available through Hammond Bay, and then also some of the other labs. And then you can also use this link here to look at the connections with the Joint Strategic Plan partners. So these are the management agencies across the basin. If you're thinking about work that would require partnering with the management agency, obtaining data from a management agency, you can check that link to see where appropriate connections might be. And then again, with respect to where you're doing work, we should all now be cognizant of where we're working and the people whose lands and waters our work may affect or intersect with. And there's this great resource some of you may know about, this interactive map called nativeland.ca. And so you can go on there and look at what groups or traditional lands your work may be, or your proposed work may be adjacent to or within. And that's one opportunity to kind of reach out to those communities and start to have discussions. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Jake to talk about a few additional resources that are available, and then we'll wrap up and have lots of time to answer questions or any additional discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I think at this point, all of these were, for the most part, mentioned during the webinar today. But here's a QR code for the placed on our website where you can find more information about additional resources and partners that are available to researchers for project support. Like Andrew mentioned, just want to reiterate the importance of reaching out to these groups as early as possible in the pre-proposal development process and as you work towards developing a full proposal. Like Andrew mentioned, in particular, the USGS Hammond Bay Biological Station has experimental tanks and research equipment and other resources available. And actually, at the time of full proposal submission, if you have plans to use this facility, you'd be required to submit a request for this space. The same goes for sea lamprey procurement. The commission helps coordinate this with Hammond Bay, and you'd be required to submit a procurement form at the time of full proposal submission. So more information is located here, and you can also find the links to the research catalogs that Andrew had mentioned earlier, just to be able to reference past projects and ongoing efforts as you develop your pre-proposals to help connect your work to projects that are ongoing. And then lastly, earlier I had mentioned we do have templates available that you're required to use as you develop your pre-proposal, and they're located on this part of our website. You can use this QR code here. And within the pre-proposals, you'll have all the templating, or the pre-proposal templates. You'll have all the templating and requirements listed there, as well as some of the evaluation criteria, much of which Andrew has already talked about today. And then here you'll also find some of the other forms that I'd mentioned, such as the sea lamprey procurement form and Hammond Bay Biological Station equipment request form, as well as templates for other proposals we offer. I think that ends it there. So yeah, I guess we'll open up to discussion now on our question and answer portion of the webinar.
Yeah, I just
Andrew, you want to?
Before we do that, Jake, I just want to note a couple of other things. There's a number of other programs that the commission supports, and there's information there on the last slide about those programs. Reach out if you have any questions. I think in future iterations of this, we will try to focus a little bit more on some of those programs and provide some more details. I also want to take a minute before we get into the discussion to call on the other staff and board members if they want to add anything to or clarify anything to what we just covered. And then I do see there's a couple questions in the chat that we'll go to first. So staff first, do you have anything you want to add or clarify? Okay, heads shaking. Board members, did you want to add anything? Steve does. Okay, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, just a plea to be specific with respect to relevance. It's really easy to arm wave, and and this work will be relevant to management and conservation. That is sort of a surefire way to sink a proposal. We're looking for specifics, and that's the challenge of going it alone, because you're not, most of us that are on the call here are in the knowledge generation space, and we're not in the rooms where those environmental decisions are made. And so that's the reason for engaging with individuals that do wear those hats, the decision makers and other knowledge users, to make sure that you can be really specific. There's an urgent need for information on this that will directly inform modeling that's used to, identify, catch rates or catch quotas in X lakes. So the more specific you can be, the more credibility, that will be had. And then it's also important to know that proposals are looked at by various other groups other than the research boards, including folks that wear that hat of practitioner and decision maker. And then that information is fed to the boards, and we can see that. So it's really hard to pull the wool over the eyes of that collective group. You might trick us with some arm waving about whether or not, it's relevant or not, but you can't trick the decision makers. And they look at this as well. And that supports our decision making. So again, just a plea, if you're going to do work that is, there's a small proportion of the portfolio that does truly fundamental work with the idea that it might pay dividends later. And I'll give the idea of when the commission helped support the funding of the lamprey genome. So you can imagine how, early days it was unclear, but that was a good strategic investment that's paying off applied dividends now. So there's a room for fundamental work, but it's a small component of the overall portfolio. So we know the social science is clear. The best way to generate actionable, relevant information that influences decision makers is to involve decision makers in the research from the beginning, i.e. co-production. So thanks.
Great. Nick or Margaret, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, maybe I'll sort of not expand, but sort of add to what Steve has said, because I think, that what is critical is that details be worked out well in advance of the full proposal in terms of feasibility, relevance. Those of us who are, say, familiar with the NSERC Discovery Grant process, it's much more general 5-page, is it of broad interest? Is it theoretically possible without necessarily having to actually do it or do it in the manner that you laid out in the proposal? But with the GLFC, I mean, it's, as Andrew said, I mean, we want to fund research. It's not like the commission is being, stingy with the money. It's generous funding. We want to see good work done, but it does have to be, well thought out and laid out. And it is challenging to do. Yeah, definitely on your own without discussions with a lot of the practitioners and others. It's often challenging the first time round, even those of us who have done it a lot. It's not unusual to have to try a second time. So I would encourage people to not be discouraged if that's the case, that it is different than some of the other broader programs, but definitely worth pursuing.
Great. Thank you, board members. So I just want to quickly cover, there were a couple questions in the chat. We'll cover those real quick, and then we'll open up the floor. The first was, could you please clarify whether identification of new spawning habitats and areas was a priority from a restoration perspective? So that specifically is not called out in the priority areas that Jake spoke about merely, but there is a paper that describes the restoration framework led by Bo Vanel et al. Maybe someone, Jake or Carrie or Julie, could drop that link in the chat. And it does talk about spawning habitat. That's important. It's not called out as a special topic priority, but it's certainly in there. I would encourage you, if you're interested in pursuing that kind of work, to take a look at that paper and then maybe reach out to myself or Bo Vanel at USGS, who's the lead, and further explore that, because there is some ongoing work there we could help you out with. Does that
Okay,
address
thank
the
you.
question?
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much.
Excellent. The second question I saw was, what are the contaminants of interest under the Indigenous special topic? That is a very good question. Unfortunately, I can't answer it because we don't have really that granularity in terms of those areas of research interest from the exercise that was undertaken through the Indigenous Great Lakes Network. The team that's coordinating that network is going to be meeting over the course of this year to really refine and revise specifically what the needs are there. But certainly, if someone is interested, I forgot to write down who put that in, but if someone is interested in pursuing that, we can put you in touch with the folks at Trent University who coordinate that network, and I'm sure that they have some more details with respect to what the interests are there. And then the third question is, since the projects would not be funded and begin till January 1st of next year, how much flexibility is there to make changes throughout the cycle? So there's a couple of things here. Typically, when a pre-proposal is submitted, no matter what, you're going to get some feedback from the board. I've yet to see a pre-proposal come through that's perfect, and there's no recommended changes from the board. I don't know that that would ever happen. So there's changes associated with that. And then once a full proposal is submitted, we have the only rule we really have is that the budget, if the budget changes by more than 5%, you have to provide a special rationale and justification for that because the board moves it forward based on a certain request. The content of the proposal certainly does change because new information becomes available, new data become available upon which to update conceptual models or rationales. So that certainly can change throughout the process. Does that answer that question? Or is there an additional piece you'd like us to talk to? I think that was Dave who asked that one, Dave Natzker. Okay, perfect. All right, let's open it up to any additional questions or discussion.
Andrew, it looks like there's some more questions coming in the chat.
Okay. Okay. Is lake whitefish included in the priority? Whitefish are typically not included as a target species for FA4 funding. I'm assuming that's focal area 4 under the GLRI funding or in the Bunnell paper. Yes, so whitefish are not, so the way the framework, this is from Robin, the way the framework was developed and approved by the Council of Lake Committees, Robin, the focus there really was on Cisco's and but it was actually designed with whitefish in mind as well. And there was a lot of discussion there. And managers, the Great Lakes managers, are certainly open and interested in whitefish. And in fact, we just had a call from the Lake Ontario Committee recently to apply some of the methods in the science planning portion of that to lake whitefish for Lake Erie. So whitefish are certainly a priority, and we have some additional language in the special topics around the specific areas that there's interest in for whitefish. So if you would like to follow up more on that, I'm certainly happy to. But the short answer is yes, whitefish are really important, I think, to focus some research effort on. All right. Robin, are you happy with that response, or did you have any follow-on?
No, that was great. Thanks, Andrew.
Okay. Yeah, if anyone else wants to add to that response or anything, they're certainly welcome to. Okay, question from Emma Rice. Would the GLFC consider a comparative study between Laurentian and African Great Lakes? The short answer is yes. We have a large lakes initiative. Our commissioners have been supportive of large lakes of the world. Jess Ives, who sits in our office, works part of her time through the Journal of Great Lakes Research, and obviously the African Great Lakes are part of that. The same sort of notion extends to the large Great Lakes of northern North America, so Great Bear and Great Slave. Those types of comparative studies have been funded. I think in those instances, you have to be even more clear about sort of demonstrating relevance. I think it's easy to do personally, but I think you have to be really clear because sometimes, folks might think, well, that's sort of outside of the convention area, and it is. But if the results have very clear benefits and utility in the Great Lakes here, and also even better, if there's utility in the African Great Lakes, that kind of work I think is viewed favorably. Board members, do you have any additional thoughts on that particular one? We should ask Margaret to weigh in. Margaret is going to be taking over the Journal of Great Lakes Research as the lead editor here soon. So, okay.
Briefly, Andrew, I wonder if it's worth pointing out that certainly we've had work come in from Lake Simcoe, some of the not the big five, so to speak. As you know, there's work on Lake Champlain. There's been a project, I think, on the Finger Lakes. Again, that relevancy is the major component. Sometimes you can test a concept or provide substantial information from a system that's more tractable that then gets applied to the Great Lakes systems.
Yes, that's a really good point. Some of my postdoc work was actually funded by the commission before I was involved, and the way that was on Great Slave Lake, and
Yeah.
we sort of sold it as a model for what historically the Laurentian Great Lakes food web may have looked like. All right, I think a few people are dropping off, but we are available to stay on and address more questions if folks want. So we do have a couple more in the chat here. How are the Indigenous-led projects reviewed? Is this done in partnership with the Indigenous Great Lakes Network? This is a very good question. And so we are right now in the process through a partnership agreement with Trent University and the folks that help coordinate the network there to figure out what those processes look like. Right now, we've been focused on bringing those types of proposals in through our fishery research program. And the main impetus has been training board members, learning more about projects that contain elements of Indigenous knowledge, how to appropriately and ethically review those proposals. What are all those considerations? We're very early on in that process. And part of what we're doing with Trent University is working to develop through the guidance of that network, a brand new funding program that's developed, designed, implemented, and led by the network, by Indigenous communities, which will then hopefully help us sort of fully address that concern that's raised here in terms of how does a board that's comprised or a commission that's comprised of largely Western scientists really effectively and appropriately handle proposals that have elements of Indigenous knowledge. So for right now, Hillary, the proposals do come through our research boards. We're working very closely with partners to make sure that we're doing what we can to appropriately review those. We do now, for the first time on the fisheries side of things, have Indigenous representation on the board. And we have had that on the sea lamprey side of things for a long time. So it's a really good question. My answer is we're not doing it the way it should be done, I think, but we're working to do it in the best way that we can, given the resources. We recognize some problems, and we're working to develop this new program to address that. Staff or board members, do you want to add to that response?
I guess, Andrew, do you want to talk about some of the learning the boards have been doing around Indigenous knowledge the last few years?
Yeah, we could certainly. Well, Carrie, are you okay to provide a little update on that since
Sure. I guess I opened my mouth about it. So yeah, I guess the research boards, so both the Sea Lamprey Research Board, Board of Technical Experts, and the Science Transfer Board have been really learning in this space of Indigenous knowledge and co-production with Western science. And as Andrew noted, we're not fully there on how to evaluate this type of these different knowledge systems, but we're learning and open to learning, and that's kind of all I wanted to say.
Great. Okay. All right. A question from Martha. Could you speak more on the limitations of indirect costs? I can come from a commercial for-profit that does environmental toxicological R&D, and I'm curious how researchers in the program find path forwards to work with the 5% cap. Martha, I can say a little bit about this, but really we've been fortunate in that most of the partners around the basin have either been able to accommodate the cap on overhead or indirect costs, or have found very creative ways to deal with it on their end of things and kind of get around some of those limitations. But we honestly haven't had too much trouble in terms of the folks who apply to our programs being able to manage that. It does cause some headaches at in administration departments elsewhere. But our reason for doing that really is that our budget is limited, and we want every dollar that we can going towards doing good for the Great Lakes and the communities that surround the lakes. And so, we operate pretty leanly. We're a very small staff. We've got about 22, 25 folks, and we try to get as many of those dollars into the hands of the people doing the work as we can. So I recognize, and I think we all recognize it can be a challenge, but I haven't, aside from one single academic institution, I haven't really had any hard nose on that from any entity in the basin. Again, some of them struggle with it, but they make it up in other ways internally. Not sure that helps you, but that's just the reality of it. All right. Any other questions, comments, additions? All right, I'm seeing the questions slow down. We'll stay on for a little bit more, but can folks maybe give an indication of whether or not this information was helpful? And we would certainly appreciate any and all feedback, whether good or bad, because like I said, this is new. We did one last year. We're doing one this year, and we again, our intent is to help you access the program. So we want to learn from this and do better. And I think our intent is to take some of these webinars and develop them into some small tutorials that we'll package on the website. I'm seeing only positive things. All right. Well, thanks everybody, and thanks to staff. And board members. All right. Do Ellen and Margaret and Nick, do you mind staying on for a minute once everyone jumps out? And the staff?
Quite fine.
Just want to get your thoughts. And Jess, did I miss Jess in the intros? I think I did.
It was on purpose. I was sneaking.
Oh. Okay. All right. Are you able to send the other three out, Carrie? Oh, well.
Hold on. It's just a slow process. You have to do it one by one.
Okay.
And I don't need to report them to Zoom.
All right. Well, I just wanted to mention to the board members that we hugely appreciate you joining. And I finished with Jake writing the script for this morning, so this is my fault. But the intent was to get a draft of this out to some board members ahead of time so we could get some feedback. And we did, when we mentioned at the board about developing this into something more, getting some input and working with the language. So I think people are interested in that. And we got some comments in the chat that people would like tutorials. So I just post hoc now wanted to get your quick feedback on what your thoughts were about the material and how we presented this and all that sort of stuff.
I'll jump in, and I apologize for I was late because I just didn't pay attention to whether I'd asked for the link or not. Sorry, Carrie, that was last minute. So I missed two questions. Did you or did the slideshow, etc., direct them towards the theme papers? I assume that was part of it.
Yeah, there was some of that for sure. I think you put some links to theme papers in the chat too, Carrie, right?
Yeah, this presentation focused less on the theme papers because last year's had more emphasis on that. But we did talk briefly about the themes.
just guidance that, there are resources out there that you don't have to
Yes.
search all by themselves. For all the background that's in the review papers, particularly like which one am I looking at? Anyway, yeah, those good papers. The other piece, just working with a couple of people who've been asking me, should I apply and etc., is they're wondering guidance on budgets. Can I pay for a graduate student? Can I pay for a postdoc? Can I pay for a graduate student and a postdoc? How much summer salary can a faculty member ask for? And that's tough because it's a little, as I said, you're balancing how much you can get done by what money you can ask for and how many people you need, etc. But maybe some guidance there. I mean, we'd love graduate students on these grants. That's awesome. You get a graduate student, trained by, with GLFC funds. But I think honestly, if a faculty member or a non-grad asked for 2 years of salary, we might raise a few eyebrows.
That's a good point, though. We should think about that because that was raised yesterday in our DFO meetings with Jess that that's one of their limitations to participating is they don't have any people. So they asked about like what can be supported, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they were really unclear with what the limits were.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes we are too.
Yeah.
Even just grad students, different universities charge different amounts. Sometimes I've looked in horror at how much it costs or been amazed how little it costs, depending on who it is.
Yeah.
That's a good point because I know the question about the 5% overhead seems awfully small for some institutions, but if it's covering your graduate students, your postdoc summer salary, I mean that it's not the same as answer discovery grant that is a grant in aid of research where there's no expectation that your answer discovery grant is covering all of the research that the GLFC it does cover. It should cover, all of the research, that anything that is part of the research is eligible in the budget, and then the 5% is sort of the extra. But yeah, I guess clarification on that.
Yeah. Okay. Hopefully someone captured that as an action for our future staff meeting to discuss, because that is a good one. The other thing DFO mentioned was just the clarity around like our template says projects are typically between $30,000 and $100,000 annual costs. That confused some people at DFO. So I think we can do more to sort of address that because they felt that was imposing a limitation, right? It doesn't have to be under 100,000. That's just general ballpark, but it might be worth like either taking those out or just modifying them in some way.
Yeah, that's tricky because on one hand, people need some guidance in terms of roughly how much can I ask for, what sort of a project. Yeah, I would have thought that the typically 30,000 to 100,000 was pretty clear. I know it's the same as when I'm talking to students about, okay, the word limit is 1,000 words. That's the limit versus it'll probably be about 1,000 words.
Right.
I always think that's very clear.
One page does not mean 1.5 pages.
A limit versus this is the guidance, but
right.
Yeah. One thing we could do though, if we wanted to look at it, is we could just calculate over the last 5 years what the average first year cost is, and then put standard deviation or 2 on it or something, just so people have. We're not saying that's a limit, but this is what the average first year of 1 year cost of a proposal is, or something. Okay, Nick, did you have any thoughts?
No, I thought it went really well. The one thing I dropped in the chat that might be useful for a slide is just who some of the primary contacts are in the Sea Lamprey Control Program.
Yeah.
Like Steve really brought out a good point about talking to the practitioners and the agents directly, and that's why I've seen a few pre-proposals fail in the past, is they didn't coordinate very well with field crews and really understand what's feasible and what's not.
Yeah, we should actually discuss that at the board meeting because we try not to. I actually reluctantly added my email to this for the first time probably ever, because we try to run all the contacts through the research email and then we reach out to whoever, but that may be less clear for people. But what I don't want is like to spam all the managers with all these researchers calling them.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to do this. So we could have a discussion at the board meetings about like what's an appropriate way to do that, because you're totally right and Steve is right, but it's, do we want to like be directly giving Brian Locke's email to everybody, or are there other ways to do it?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And same token, in the Fisheries Research Board, we certainly get proposals. I mean, again, and I love the way you said it. We're really welcoming, we're pushing for new investigators to come in, come talk to us, and all this. And you do get the ones that come in and kind of go, "Oh, I got this idea." It's like, been done there. Look at the literature. There are good people. They've either done it, they're doing it, they're in the middle of it. You should talk to them. Something. It doesn't have to be you or Brian, Andrew, but how to gently say, do your homework, figure out what's been going on recently in the field,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, if people are, paying attention, that especially with the past 2 years with the webinar, that you're trying to make it very clear that these are the resources we want to, that resources are available, contacts, even if it's for now still just that single point of contact, and then that can be passed on to the relevant people if they're willing and able, but that trying to get potential researchers past the I have to do this all on my own and just wing it and throw it in and hope for the best, and that they, it really is like a very generous program. The funding levels very generous compared to like 30,000 a year with NSERC if you're lucky, sort of thing. But it's not just vague ideas. It's not it has to be it has to be worked out, and it's awfully hard for somebody to do that without talking to managers and whatnot. And so I'm hoping people have now get a sense of, you want to be able to answer questions if people have questions. If people have questions about the budget and they're confused, they should reach out and ask. And that, I think, is the message, probably first and foremost with the webinars.
Yeah.
I think too, it depends on where people come from. There are certainly plenty of places, and I've been there too, either the place or the field, that are deeply, deeply competitive. You would never tell somebody else what you're working on. You would never feel you'd have the gumption to sort of just ask them for. Whereas my experience entirely in the Great Lakes is, oh, sure, we can help, we can advise, happy to talk to you. We got a boat, etc. But that's new to, and often particularly international or other cultures, should we say. And I think this goes a long way to making that apparent, Andrew, as you're saying, hey, we're here for you to the extent that our time allows and we can.
That's great. Yeah, the last year, actually, we had, I would say, probably Carrie and I mostly had more people reach out and say, we want to set up a meeting with you and talk about like more on the sea lion prey side. But we had probably 5 or 6 across both programs, or 7, reach out, new PIs, and have meetings, and in one case 2 meetings, to help them sort of get on the right track. So I'll be curious how many new conversations with new PIs this inspires.
Yeah, they have expertise and skills we can definitely use. The question is, to make sure that it's focused and harnessed, and rather than sort of just parallel, but naive proposals.
Yeah. Okay. Well, any other thoughts? I super appreciate you staying on for a few extra minutes. I know it's Friday. I told the staff we're gonna release early for the day because it's been a busy, long few weeks.
So wait, we're between you guys and beer? I'm sorry. I'll go away.
Yeah.
And forgotten it was even Friday.
No, I was just thinking, Andrew, vis-a-vis, the RFP that we've got going on in Champlain, and the separately from that, the postdoc is like, I sort of had this vision of like, we're kind of the baby lake. We'll bring them up and send them to you. So,
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.
Have a
You
nice,
too.
wonderful break. Yeah.
Nice to see you all.
Yep.
See you.
Yeah.
Take care.
Cheers.
Yeah,
Thanks.
take care.
Take care.